Hi, Michael A. Smith here again, continuing our storytelling session regarding my murder mystery novel, Secrets. In our first session, we learned that Frank Montgomery's neighbor, Vernon Ritchie, was run over and stabbed in a field not far from the Lakeview subdivision where they live. At the same time, Lois Montgomery, Frank's wife, was out walking in the middle of the night in the rain at the precise time that Vernon was killed. So we pick up this story about 12 hours later on Sunday afternoon around 1 o'clock when Frank, a newspaper reporter, and his wife Lois decide to go next door and offer their condolences to Shirley Ritchie. Their knock on the door is answered by Ann, the oldest of the three Ritchie children. Lois asks, "How are you doing, Ann? How is Caleb and Lisa?" And while Lois goes off to talk to the children, Frank walks out onto the deck leading off of the kitchen where he sees Shirley. She's on the deck smoking a cigarette. Now, the way the subdivision is laid out is that there's a small lake with three two-story houses on each side. Lois and Frank occupy the house at one end of the lake opposite the dam. So Frank says to Shirley, "How are you holding up? I'm so sorry." And she says, "I'm barely maintaining my sanity, Frank. The detective Murray was here earlier this morning asking me if I knew of anybody who might want to kill Vernon." I was just amazed. I didn't know what to say. Vernon's a real estate broker. He sells houses. Somebody's always happy in the sale of a house. The seller didn't get as much money as they wanted. The buyer didn't get the house they wanted, but surely that's not reason enough for anyone to want to kill Vernon. Frank says, "I wouldn't think so." He said, "Is anything else? What else did you tell Murray?" She said, "Well, Vernon was involved in building a subdivision. He'd purchased 100 acres. He'd got other investors involved. They were going to build houses and sell them. Unfortunately, the contractor went bankrupt. There's a lawsuit. A lot of the investors are unhappy, including our next door neighbor, Jesse Fernandez." Frank looks to the deck of the house next door to Shirley's house, and actually Jesse Fernandez and his wife Emma, both retired, are out on the deck. Jesse's helping Emma back into the house. Frank knows that Emma has a drinking problem. And Shirley says, "But again, we all know Jesse. He wouldn't kill Vernon even if he stood to lose a substantial amount of money," which apparently he does. And Frank said, "Anything else?" And Shirley said, "Well," she said, "Vernon was upset because in recent weeks he'd been receiving a lot of anonymous emails, even phone calls, telling him secrets about some of our neighbors." "Secrets?" Frank said. "What are you talking about?" Shirley said, "Well, for example, the Iversons. Someone called and said that they both attended orgies." And Frank looked down to the house next door to the Fernandez where the Iversons lived, but neither one of them were on the deck. Frank said, "What else?" "Well, he received an email with an attachment containing some news articles which indicated that your neighbor, Luke Wright, is a child molester." Frank said, "That's unbelievable." "And that Gail, next door to the Wrights, is a prostitute." Frank looked across the lake at the middle house over there, and he could actually see Gail sunbathing on the deck. She was the mother of a 3-year-old. Her husband, J.W., was a lawyer. Shirley continued. She said, "And of course, both Vernon and I had trouble with Carmen Cockrell and her son Ray." And Frank said, "What's that about?" "Well, Ray and Ann are dating. They're both seniors in high school. They're even talking about getting married. We want Ann to go to college. Carmen and Ray thinks that we don't want them to get married because we think Ann is better than Ray." And that's true, Frank. In fact, someone told Vernon that Ray deals drugs over at the high school. So we've had several arguments with them. Doesn't sound like any of those reach the level of persuading someone to murder Vernon. And Shirley says no. She said, in fact, there was only one time that someone threatened to kill Vernon. And Frank said, well, what was that? She said, 25 years ago, we lived in Chicago. Vernon was driving his car down a back street by some row houses, and a woman stepped out of her car, and and Vernon hit her, and she was killed. Her husband threatened to kill Vernon. But Vernon was found not to be at fault. Shortly after that, we moved out of Chicago down here. So this is where we'll stop this storytelling session. And in the next session, Frank Montgomery, who's a newspaper reporter, will follow up all of those leads and see if he can track down the person responsible for the death of Vernon Ritchie. In the meantime, I hope you'll check out my website at the Authors Guild, which is www.goodnovels.org. You can read about secrets or my other works. I'll see you at the next session. Thanks for listening in.